this video, Andrew and I are going to discuss how colonization still affects Indigenous people today. First, I'm going to briefly talk about colonization. Colonization against Indigenous people began in the early 1700s. Colonization is non-Indigenous people coming and kicking Indigenous people off of Indigenous land, as well as trying to turn their way of life into the dominant Western point of view. Even though it happened a really long time ago, it is still very apparent in today's society and even in the government. I'm going to discuss how the government has contributed and created intergenerational trauma. The government put the Indian Act into play in 1876. An amendment on it required Indigenous children to attend residential schools, meaning the children who attended these schools were raised by nuns and priests and were taught Christian beliefs and not traditional Indigenous culture. This created a lot of trauma for Indigenous people because Indigenous children were being stripped of their Indigenous identities, meaning they will grow up not knowing their own culture, as well as they were raised by nuns and priests who abused and did plenty of other terrible things to the children, meaning generations of Indigenous children will grow up stripped of their culture and having no way of knowing how to be loved or love. Intergenerational trauma comes in when those children have children of their own and are not able to raise them because the parents themselves are traumatized and only know what they were forced to learn in residential schools. Now Andrew is going to continue.
So colonization has affected the Indigenous community for many reasons. Like they were stripped of all what they had, so they could no longer traditionally practice their part of their culture. Also, they were forced out of their homes to live on a reserve, where the conditions there were, in my personal opinion, not good enough. I mean, they didn't even have running water for the longest time, and because they were forced to live on the reserve, they no longer owned their own property. And also, because of the colonization, the children were moved to go to a residential school, where they were treated very poorly. And because of this, some of the Indigenous people that came back from those residential schools are going to suffer for some post-traumatic stress because how poorly treated they were at those schools. So, in a nutshell, to basically explain colonization, it's basically when someone removes all of what you have, and that's how you're going to live from then on. So it'd be like if I had a house and it was just taken away from me, they took my car and all that stuff, I would have to live on how they feel.